I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is 10/10, October 10th, 2024. It is Thursday. And today, a great program, what I always promise, and that is robust conversation. I'm pleased to have two friends of mine, two leaders in community, to talk about a couple of major topics, and we'll freestyle as well over the next 1 hour or so. You're going to enjoy the conversation. I'm going to enjoy it. I think it'll be beneficial to you and to me and to all of us whenever we sit together and talk and reason, argue, if you will, but share our stories, our perspective, our analyses, and our expectations, our aspirations. We benefit, we grow individually, we grow as community, as families, and this is a place for us to do growing. You know what I love about the technology is that I tell people that let's have this conversation. If it's just me and you, that's the level of intimacy. But we also know that the me and you, because of technology, could mean a million more people in our conversation. And brothers and sisters, that's exactly what we want. We want a million more. We want to create a connection between millions of us all over the community, all over the world. Our community, our neighborhood, at this point is the globe. I've told this story before. I say when I grew up in Kansas City, my parents would say, Al, I'm 5 years old. You can go out, but don't go past the alley and don't go past the block. I lived on 28th in Brooklyn. And so my neighborhood was my world. And I understood that. I knew the boundaries. I tell you now that with the technology, with the ability to be together on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn and other platforms, with even tools like television, radio, and newspapers, our reach and our ability to connect and our sense of what the world is greater, it's expanded. So I say today, our world is our neighborhood. We belong everywhere on this planet. We are everywhere on the planet. And we simply need to continue to develop the sense of sovereignty, the sense of personal belonging that connects us to each other, wherever we are in this country, in this town, in the hemisphere, and on the globe, and connect others to us. There are challenges, and the challenges are things we have to discuss. Part of that we will get into today. Let me welcome in Brother Thomas Berry. Thomas Berry is here to talk about the African American Family Preservation Act. And we're going to use that as a point of departure, a beginning, just sort of an update, what it means, what it stands for, what the advantages are, what the challenges are. But beyond that, there's the discussion that Brother Berry and I have had and are having about the question of reparations, about the question of sovereignty, about the question of power, and how we come to know and develop and exercise power on our own behalf in the arena of community, in the arena of the world. What does it mean? And what are the markers? What are the metrics? How do we know that we are getting what we envision and that we can visualize a future, co-author a future that whose story says that we are the winners? Well, Brother Berry, as always, good to see you. Welcome back to the conversation. And let me introduce my other friend who's an author, an elder, a leader, an international voice, and that's Brother Wilfred Harris. Wilfred Harris is active in the Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, and American Liberian community. I go to him when I want to learn about this rich and intricate and storied relationship between Africans in West Africa in general, Liberia in particular, and Africans who are here, myself included. What are our connections? What kind of opportunities, obligations, challenges, problems do we have and have to navigate and negotiate? Brother Wilfred, good afternoon. Welcome to the conversation.
Oh, you're always welcome. I could just sit here and listen to you all day. You know that.
Well, we're going to listen to each other. You have to bring your camera back down. Keep your camera centered. There we go, like me and Thomas Berry. So hang out with us.
Okay.
Hang out with us, Brother Wilfred Harris. Thomas Berry, I'm going to start with you. What's on your mind, first of all? How are you doing today? And tell me about how you're feeling.
Well, I'm doing well, man. I tell you what's on my mind more so every day is ways to make things better for our community and making sure that we are not only making today great, but we're making tomorrow better for those who are going to inherit it after we're gone. And so my drive every day when I wake up is figuring out a way to make it better, whether it's the African American Family Preservation Act or conversations and trying to push reparations. All of these things are centered around the Black family. So my goal every day is trying to figure out a way to push the Black family forward. Are we perfect? No, I'm not perfect. I made several thousand mistakes in my lifetime, and I'm probably going to make 100,000 more. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we can't push towards that perfection of better in our family and our community.
And so, bettering our family and community in light of the family preservation mission, describe that. Talk about the legislation and the activism around family preservation, and take it out from there.
Well, it started with this sister named Khalees Houston out of Michigan who came and was working over at St. Joe's. Uh, about St. Joe's is now shut down, and she was working with the youth, and she was finding that there was a lot
Hold
of
it, no. So somebody doesn't know about St. Joe's. So when
oh,
you mention something, go ahead and take, with no hurry, take your time,
no,
and
okay, you're right,
give the backstory on everything.
So St. Joe's was a place where they would pretty much put African American children and other youth who were having issues with their home. Either it was through the legal system or just because Child Protection Services removed them, they would go to this facility. Sister Khalees Houston, when she was working there, what she noticed at the time that there was a lot of our children, especially from that 55412 zip code that was inside of St. Joseph. She didn't like the treatment of the children. And as the story goes, one day she was in the office and she bumped something, and then a binder hit her upside her head, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And inside of this binder, she got to reading some of the pertinent information of how much St. Joseph was making off those children coming into the facilities, the discrepancy pieces on the children, and some of the practices. So that birthed the idea of something needs to be done. Fast forward.
Before you move on, 55412, that's North Minneapolis. Right now, I'm sitting in 55411, which is south of Lowry Avenue. And I
Yes, sir.
think 55412 is probably north of Lowry or north of Golden Valley, but it's North Minneapolis. And obviously, it's the heart of the Black community. So go ahead.
Heart of the Black community, where all the disparities inside of the Twin Cities pretty much lie. You can find it right there in North Minneapolis. So the sister did what a reasonable Black person would do. She said, "Hey, we got to make some change about it." And so she began this journey of joining a lot of political action groups. She started joining, the NAACP. She started joining other the DFL, the African American DFL caucus, and other things, because she wanted to change the legislation to make sure that these discrepancies or these disparities would go away. And so that sister began the journey. So then fast forward, she runs into myself and brother Nick Muhammad. Well, and she was telling us about it at Black Civic Network. And I previously met Khalees. I knew she was a tough cookie. She would argue me down like nobody's business. So I knew she was tough. I knew she was smart, but I knew she was passionate. And the one thing about Khalees is she don't lie. And so if she tells you that it's a problem, it's a problem. And so we started going on this journey with the sister, going down to the Capitol. Originally, it was Rena Moran, former state rep Rena Moran, who's now county commissioner in Ramsey County, Rena Moran, and Jeff Hayden, who were the authors of this bill. And so that first leg for me and brother Nick Muhammad, what we noticed is that our community was not down there fighting on the behalf of these children. Many people did not know about it, not because Khalees wasn't telling the story. It was just that the organizations, that wasn't anyone's focus. They were focusing on mass incarceration.
You froze up, Nick. Maybe you have to, there we go, come back. Try now, Nick, or Thomas. Go ahead. I called you Nick Thomas. I meant Thomas. Go ahead.
I get it. We both get it all the time.
Yeah.
So they were focusing on mass incarceration. They were focusing on trauma. They was focusing on a lot of things and still do. And so Khalees kept going. Like, she was relentless. Even after Rena Moran moved on to county to become a county commissioner, and brother Jeff Hayden, got voted out. she still went back to the Capitol. Bobby Joe Champion, who's also a North Sider and a state senator, he authored it this round, and so did Esther Abaje. And what ended up happening was the Minneapolis NAACP, they got on board, they started supporting. We had a few clergy members. Shout out to Reverend, his name is, I'll come back to his name in a moment.
Sure.
But it was a couple people who came down and they started supporting, and we started getting some traction. And the bill finally passed, 8 years in the making. It passed this past May. It was one of those bills that was bipartisan in the House. There was no nays. All of the Republicans voted for it, gave an impassionate speech. Republican state rep gave an impassionate speech that was saying that, hey, pretty much you're not a Christian if you don't vote for this bill. And I tell you, it was a tough fight. I mean, I'm telling you guys, I'm giving you the cliff notes, but I will tell you, during this journey, questions was asked. We had to define what an African American was, or what was the definition of Black. People were certainly taking shots because they felt like if this bill passed, that it was going to mess up the sovereignty for the Native American tribes. So they were pushing back against the bill. Right now, Brother McFarlane, one of the things that happened was because of the bill, we have a DFL state rep who passed a bill that now is targeting Black families for the children who are still in cars. And so they're going to start charging the families in Child Protection Service courts with neglect to remove their children, even though they knew this bill was passing. So they're doing everything which way possible to counter us having our families whole. And I will tell you one last piece. A Republican senator, first time we went out, he said something that was moving to me. Senator Abler, he said, I'm watching the Latino communities pack these rooms talking about the legislation for the driver's license, and they're here. It comes a time when we're talking about your children, your family, your future. Your community should be having this room packed. I'm telling you, with the numbers and the data, and this is him talking, this is the most important issue in your community. There is no way possible that we only have 10s or 20s of you. This should be filled from corner to corner to talk about your children. And so I'll leave it at that, because that's how important this bill is.
Well, let's go back. Do you happen to have a copy of the bill handy? Can you?
You know what? I got one. I got pulled up right here. I can talk about it.
Up, yeah, and maybe if there's a summary that describes the bill in the bill's language, share that, because too often our people don't read legislation. I mean, that's technical, jargon to the average person, so the average person won't read it or hear it. But maybe you can, use parts of it in this program just so that it's voiced.
Let me see if I can find a summary on it, because I had the entire bill.
Okay.
See,
the summary or highlights of the bill, like the.
So I can read some of the highlights. I'll just name some of the things real quick that the bill does, which I find is 100% important.
And start with the actual name of the bill, the document itself again.
Yes, sir. It is Minnesota HF 912, better known as the Minnesota African American Family Preservation and Child Welfare Disproportionality Act.
Okay.
All right. And so one of the things that this bill does right away is it says that the purpose of the Minnesota African American Family Preservation and Child Welfare Disproportionate Act is to protect the best interests of African American and disproportionately represented children, promote the stability and security of African American and disproportionately represented children and their families by establishing minimum standards to prevent the arbitrary and unnecessary removal of African American and disproportionality represented children from their families. Now, I tell you, that line alone, if you know our numbers in the state of Minnesota, we have some of the worst numbers when it comes to the removal of African American children compared to every other group. And part of it is because of the federal dollars that the state of Minnesota receives every time that a child is removed from a home. Let me give you some data. African American children are 3 times more likely to be reported than their white counterparts. African American and children of 2 or more races are 2.4 to 4.7 times more likely to be screened in for assessment and investigation. African American and children of 2 or more races are placed in out-of-home care at a rate 2 to 7 times higher than their white counterparts. The longer African American children remain in out-of-home placement care, the more they experience multiple moves in placement settings. They get moved so much that the state of Minnesota don't even track the numbers to give you an average of amount of the placements or the movements. And last but not least, African American youth have high rates of reaching the age of majority, which is 18, when in placement for long periods of time. So our children can come in at 3 and they won't leave until they're 18, living among stranger care. And people have to understand that it's not facts of life. It's not different strokes. It's not Webster. Black children are not being removed from their families and placed with white millionaires and billionaires that care and love them and want to give them the best possible. No, our children are sometimes removed from homes for things that simple fixes, just poverty, that the state or the county could easily spend $5,000, $7,000 and remedy it, but they will prefer to take the children out of the home and spend anywhere up to $21,000 for stranger care. They know with the statistics and the studies that it's better for children to remain in the home, even if they are in a home that may be impoverished. I'll give you another two stats as well. Less than 9% of our children are removed for physical abuse. Less than 2% are removed for sexual abuse. When you add the 9 and the 2 together, you get 11. So that means 89% of our children are removed for a thing called neglect. And neglect is very subjective. Neglect could be, Brother Al and Brother Wilford, that a social worker comes to the home and doesn't like the way that the home is being kept because that social worker has no understanding of African American culture. She doesn't know why the kids are loud. She don't know why the mother is loud. She may not understand, or he may not understand why some of the uncles are out front. They may not understand some of the other customs, how we display affection or we don't display affection based off of our historical trauma with slavery. And they will use that against parents. I've been on cases with the piloted portion of the bill with Hennepin County where a mother literally lost her child because the social worker felt like the mom wasn't hugging the child when the social worker felt like the child should be hugged.
Let me jump in and just sort of see if I'm understanding and hearing and also provide more context. I have been reporting on this issue for a generation or two.
Yeah.
And so it's not new, but it's still not widely known enough, and the community broadly doesn't have the voice yet. It's developing it, and what you have done with this act is a step in the right direction. But the Republican was exactly right. Our people need to be totally, fully informed, aware, and invited and when these questions are on the agenda at the state house or the county or the city government. In history, we used to call this out-of-home placement. That was the broad name that we talked about. And the synopsis is that something happens in a Black family, a social worker, agent of the court says we should take this child out of the house because of the child's safety, for the sake of the child. And then what do we do with the child? Well, we put him in a place like St. Joe's, or put them into a process where that child can be in foster care. Who is providing foster care? In Minnesota, in history, the foster care network was typically white. And so much so, and so consistently so, if you stepped back, you would see what you could only describe as a pattern. And the pattern that you describe, you could also define as a business. And the business is that these families have figured out how to augment their income under the guise of being helpful, supporting young people who need care, who the courts have said their homes are not providing them with proper care. Therefore, the court removes that child from the family and places the child in a white home. White people build additions on their houses and grow their net worth, their asset base, because they have funding from the county or the state to support children that they have in foster care. Foster care, in this regard, we have said from the Black community, ends up being a business with our children being the product. It's a new version of slavery by another name. The problem is complicated because we and the Native Americans have fought this idea that white supremacy described itself as able to rescue Black children and brown children from their culture. And the rescuing implied that being around white people would make our people better human beings. That who could argue that life in a white home wouldn't be better than life in any Black home? That was the presumption that we challenged and that you challenged, because the data showed that our children were not particularly advantaged by being around white people. The trauma continued. And you discovered that systems have not worked to ensure that options in the family, extended family, are the first and the developed resources so that the children can remain in culture, in their family, in their community, if there is a need for them to be out of their parents' home for some period of time, or even to develop the foster care network inside the Black community. And our communities historically, not only here, but around the country, everybody got cousins and nephews and nieces that you took care of without looking for, and certainly without getting any government assistance, just costs that you had to shoulder, and you did it because you felt you had to, it was your duty. The question is, does the government have a duty to recognize our ability to and our desire to support our own children and support us in doing that with our tax dollars? Or does the government find itself justified in simply removing children from our community and from the chance to be in community, and in the process enabling and enriching, this is a skeptic's point of view, but enriching white people, some of whom don't have the ultimate best interest. And even if they have good interest, is it enough when there's a better option for the children that recognizes the dignity and sanctity of our culture? That's my synopsis. How close or far am I from you on that, Brother Barry?
You're spot on. You're spot on, because it becomes diabolical at some point. Mm-hmm. It becomes diabolical because we start seeing manipulation amongst the young folk, or where they start telling them that their families didn't want to have anything to do with them. And then they push them further and further away from the aunt, the uncle, the cousins, the grandmothers that they miss. And they say,
let me ask Brother Wilford to keep adjusting your camera, Wilford, so you're in the center. Keep your camera back so that you're centered in the frame there. Yeah, bring it down to more. Yeah, try to make sure you keep the camera like there. Okay, go ahead, Thomas.
Okay then.
And so you're spot on. And
thank you.
Part of the add-ons to the homes that you're talking about is being funded by those young people. Mm-hmm. And so what we have a two-pronged problem in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota is a heavy child welfare. They talk about it's a woman and child state, but it's basically off of social services. And so families typically flock here because they are poor, they're impoverished. And when they arrive at some of these shelters, that's when they get their first interaction with a child protection service call. They may never have seen that happen inside of Michigan. They may have never seen that inside of Indiana and Illinois. But when they go down and they stay at Sharon and Karen, or they stay at some of these shelters, now they're getting child protection services called on them. Now their children are now in the system and they're in a place with nothing but strangers. And they may not be aware of some of the laws in the state of Minnesota. They're not even trying to teach the families, Brother Al, some of the laws so that they can parent better and walk within the lines of the law. And so what you start seeing is they start manipulating, and everything that you're saying is right. It's Layla Jackson, rest in peace, a 2-year-old Black girl who was killed by her foster parent father, who Layla's brother, who was in the home at the time, 10 years old, was telling the social worker time after time that this man was physically harming them, that he was yelling in Layla's face. The boy took his sister, ran away, and hid in the woods. What did this system do? They removed the child, the 10-year-old, and left his sister inside of the home with the abusive foster parent. What does the abusive foster parent do? He kills the girl.
Wow.
And you have to understand, he was writing, drawing SWAT stickers on the girl's forehead, right? He was videoing himself yelling racial epithets in this 2-year-old girl's face. And the child would have been better off with her mother, would have been left better with the family. But this is how broken the system is. Another story. 6 children from Texas moved to Minnesota. These 6 children were constantly complaining about their foster parent, this lesbian couple. The boy ran away several times here in the state of Minnesota. Every time he ran away from home, Child Protection Services brought him back. Those women drove to California with those kids and drove those children off of a bridge and killed those children. It was a CNN story. That story did not get any coverage here in the state of Minnesota. It was almost as if the story was ignored based off of the fact that it flew in some of the faces of them constantly telling us that they're going to do right by our children. And it's many more stories. I have stories of parents doing the best that they can do as parents, putting rules and regulations on their youth, telling their daughter, hey, we caught you talking to, you're 16 and you're talking to a 20-year-old man. Of course you're going to be on punishment. Of course you're going to have restrictions, as a parent's supposed to. That child runs away. Ramsey County judge orders the child back into the home with the parents. Hennepin County steps in. Nope, can't. Why? Because now the child is claiming that she's being abused because she doesn't want to go home. No proof of abuse. No proof. Just her words. 8 months investigation, still no proof. And guess what? The mother ended up losing custody of her child without them even proving she abused her child. Just white folk upset because the mom was saying, well, if my daughter's telling you she's suicidal, why are you talking to me about driver's license? Shouldn't she be seeing a therapist? Why would you be talking to me about her going to view a school? If you took her out of my care because you're saying that she's being abused, don't you think she should be seeing a therapist for all of these things that you're saying I'm doing wrong? Why are you finding extracurricular activities, right? And the most craziest thing about all of this is you can walk into a courtroom and you can find 6 white women at a time telling one Black mother how to raise their child. 6 at a time telling one. And they believe that their way is right, as you were stating. And everything about our culture, our customs of accountability, our customs of do for self, all of these things that's ingratiated into us that we feel like what makes us great Americans, right? Law-abiding Americans. Child Protection Services with the out-of-home placement and the fear that they have placed into Black parents in the Twin Cities. They are the reason behind the Kia boys that they are complaining about so much. 70% of the children who are sitting inside of these juvenile detention centers have been placed in a how to home placement. They are a product of child protection services.
What did you call them? What kind of boys?
The Kia boys. That's what
Kia,
they call.
Kia boys. Okay, I didn't know that's the language, right?
Yeah, that's
And
what they call.
explain that. Explain that. Take a minute.
So, and it's a phenom that's happened around the country. Young boys have learned from the ages of 10 all the way up to 16, have learned how to break into Kias and steal them. Inside of the Twin Cities, we've had a plethora of car jackings that have taken place. Some of these kids have had guns on them. Some of these kids have died in the process of stealing these cars from joyriding. We had just last month where a few of the children got shot by a car owner who was going back to retrieve his gun. Retrieve his car. But this is all tied in. The public safety conversation that we're having, this is all tied into child protection services because of that decay that's always, I've been in Minnesota since the 90s. When I moved to Minnesota as a teenager, this is the first place that I've ever heard teenagers talking about calling the system on their parents. Back where I'm from, you can't call anyone on your parent if you're wrong. You might can call your grandmother to get your mother off of you, or call your grandfather to get your father off of you, but you didn't call the system. Minnesota insists on being the ipso facto parent. And anytime things go wrong in our community, we yell the parents need to get the kids. Well, what the African American Family Preservation Act is trying to do is to say we not only want the parents to get their kids, but we want them to be able to retain the rights to be parents or keep the children in the family if anything goes awry. It's a part of the bill called active efforts. Active efforts mean that we have so many transient people who move here that yes, you should call Kansas City to see if the grandmother wants to take care of the children. Yes, you should call Chicago to see if the uncle may want to be able to take in the nephew. Yes, you should be able to call Gary, Indiana to see if there's a cousin that may want to take on the twins. But you have to make a concerted effort and you have to show. And that's different than what it was in the past, right? Because they never wanted, and it's a big push. Ramsey County right now is struggling with the idea of how do we make active efforts, which shows that they weren't making an effort to reunify the children and the parents to begin with, even though that was previous state law.
Let's talk about that some more too. And you mentioned there was a tiff between the Native American and the Black community, but the Native American question with being taken out of homes and out of culture is fascinating, and it's a variation on our experience. The variation due to the fact that they are indigenous here, and the culture as a part of its conquest, as a part of its imperial movement, publicly derided and devalued the Indian culture, the Indian or the Native or the indigenous culture and families. And as this country expanded, they documented removal of children from their homes and putting them in boarding schools in Minnesota, the Dakotas, in Canada. And now it's coming to light that there are unmarked graves of where boarding schools, basically allowed to die or killed children, right? And where the society turned a blind eye and didn't investigate, didn't evaluate, nobody was held accountable. But the society structure itself was one that enabled individuals and institutions acting under the cover of whatever they want to call it, civilization. And they would say things like, we want to take the savage out of the, you heard that, what was that phrase? I can't remember. It was some phrase that said, we want to kill the Indian and let the white person emerge out of an Indian body, something like that. Do you know the phrase? You know that phrase?
I'm familiar with the terminology. I forget the phrase, but it was
something like that.
They wanted to wash out the native in them,
wash
out the savage, and raise the white man, raise them up to be white men.
And so that's their experience, and they've got documentation and pain and trauma, no less significant than our trauma as products of the transatlantic slave trade,
Yeah.
and a massive attempt to deny and destroy our sense of being even human beings.
Yes.
Uh, and so, when you sit back, Brother Barry, Brother Harris, and question, why should we listen to anything they have to say? Because what they have done tells us who they are and what they really think and what they believe. And why then ought we not be clear that we must be on a footing to fight for our dignity and for our humanity. And that our fight for our humanity necessarily means at some point in time the destruction of the falsehood that they call supremacy, white supremacy, that they use to enslave, to chain, to marginalize our people, to deny our humanity, and to continue exploitative, extractive power uh, in their own community and in ours as well. And that our freedom ultimately, Brother Barry, I think is a freedom that requires not only us discovering and acting in our own agency with our own authenticity and sovereignty, but that will force a change on their side as well, a change that they may be unwilling to make, but at the end of the day, they'll have no choice. What do you think, Thomas?
So I think that that's ultimately what it's about. And it's about us also, because we had this conversation about reparations the last time I was on, and I told you the main thing is we have to repair the relationship amongst ourselves. When you have a community that have their children being targeted, we can't be too distracted to where we don't fight for our children. I've been in rooms with people clapping about all kinds of things. I just saw Jacob Fry win a $2,400 date at the Urban League. But when they talked about the African American Family Preservation Act, the Sister Khalees Houston, shout out to Sister Marquita Stevens, I didn't feel like the room was warm receiving the idea that we got someone who got a bill passed for our children and that we should be trying to find out if it's a problem, but we have to preserve our families. What's that about? And I want to be clear because I don't believe that it's all of the native tribes. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that there's some white adjacent native tribes, but I don't believe that it's all of the tribes. Some of the tribes are just focused on what's going on their reservations and trying to make sure that they're keeping their things intact.
And so why was there concern that legislation that we presented for our community, why did they feel threatened? What was the argument? What was the discussion, if you can remember?
Well, they think that it tampers with their sovereignty. They want to be the only sovereign group. They don't want African Americans or ADOS folk to go for sovereignty because they feel like if they have to share that piece of the pie with us or it has to be debited amongst us. And what they don't get is we're not necessarily looking to fight for anything that we don't want to take anything from the natives. We know that this is their native land. We understand that we are forced guests here. Let me say that again. We are forced guests here. And not only were we forced guests, we were also forced guests in some of their tribes as well. And so I think that a lot of it is based off of just a misunderstanding as well as a level of fear, because that's what you have with oppressed groups. Oppressed groups typically look at other oppressed groups and say, hey, as long as I'm better than them. Well, you pass the African American Family Preservation Act. We have an African American Child Well-Being Division that will be passed with this bill. So now we got a division that is making sure that these out-of-home placements is on the upright. Now we have more parameters in place to make sure that these social workers are getting adequate training on our cultural practices. Now we got checks and balances in place to make sure that active efforts are always, and that social workers don't have the comfort to just misquote or misstate in documents, because they do a lot of that as well. And so I feel that they felt that it was going to ruffle equal, but the Supreme Court voted to uphold equal, right? And I'll say this, I've never seen anybody in the Black community in any of the rooms that I've been in speak about the natives not getting anything. This has always been about a concentrated effort on making sure we keep our families whole.
Mhm.
Sister Denise Houston has done this, and I just want to say this. She's done this without funding.
Mhm.
The McKnight Foundation didn't give her $1. The Polad Foundation didn't give her a quarter. None of these foundations, the Sauer Foundation didn't give her half $1. Like, you will be shocked on how much work got done by this young lady who was doing earnest work for people. She's not even a parent. She doesn't have children that was taken away from her. She did this because it was the right thing to do, and she felt like God gave her the word to do, and she just did it, and she's continuing to do that fight. So I feel like when we, think about this African American Family Preservation Act, it's something to be celebrated. We should be celebrating this as loudly as we did the Crown Act. And I always tell this, and no disrespect, because I'm saucy when I talk, Mr. McFarlane. But if you think the white boys care about you coming in there with exotic hairdos at the job, as if that bothers them, you got it wrong. You're part of their fantasy with your exotic hairdo. That's nothing to celebrate. As Dr. King told us when he came here in 1965, the white man will give you anything that doesn't cost him anything. If it's free, wear your hair like you want to wear it, baby. They don't care about that. So we should be celebrating this African American Family Preservation Act. And on top of that, we should be pushing for more legislation, more things, because we have to go back. We want to make sure that we get fathers more implementing the bill, because they do a lot of separating the black fathers from this. We want to make sure that they get TANF funding, where families are being more incentivized to stick together versus going separate ways. As long as they decide that they want to get married, most people don't know that there's a federal law that was passed by Bill Clinton, the Welfare Act, that will cover you getting an education or a trade, being able to buy a home, being able to get health care and your food, as long as the two parents stick together and make a concentrated effort of being married and not having kids out of wedlock. This is how we preserve the family. Those dollars are spent at child development classes, at community colleges, and other things, because the federal government gave states the power to decide how they're going to spend the money. And then the states gave the counties power on how they can spend those dollars as well. So some white rural counties, they use those TANF dollars to keep white families together.
Mhm.
Hennepin County, Ramsey County, they don't use those TANF dollars for African American families.
Okay, okay. Let me bring in my friend Wilfred, and we'll come
Yes,
back. Wilfred, bring your camera down again so
okay.
it's centered. There we go. Yeah,
You got it?
yeah, that's better. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Thank you for being a
It's always a
listener.
pleasure, Art.
Yeah, and I guess I want you to react to the conversation between Al McFarlane and Thomas Berry. We're discussing what we both would say is a critical issue in the legacy African American community. He used the term, and I did as well, ADOS, uh, uh, and that's American Descendants of Slavery, right, Thomas? American Descendants of Slavery.
Mhm.
How does that description fall on Liberian ears? What in the discussion that we've had so far about family preservation resonates, if any, with your experience as a Liberian American, and how, in your mind, does the Liberian community connect with, relate to, respond to the things that we have described? I raise the question because too often, I believe, our country has been expert in the politics of divide and conquer. And when it has invited our sisters, brothers, cousins from other countries to here, part of the invitation included an instruction. The instruction is stay away from the Black Americans because they have all kinds of bad things about them,
Yeah.
and you don't want to be tainted. In fact, I tell this, and I'm still mad. I was talking to a Somali brother at a sort of a classroom over in the community from Augsburg College, I think. I was a presenter, he was a presenter. He said, well, and we're both talking to a bunch of white kids in a school about urban, and cultural and ethnic, et cetera. And he says, well, we tell our kids, we don't let our kids play basketball. We want them to play soccer. And it's because basketball, we associate it with Black Americans. Soccer, we associate with white Americans. We think our kids are better off being around white people. We've been told to stay away from you Black people. So that's kind of the in-house instruction. Let me put another angle on that. As you know, Wilfred, my father is from Cuba and came here from Jamaica and came with an accent that was noticeable, either Spanish sometimes or certainly British Jamaican accent. And as a child, I grew up in Kansas City, recognizing how my father was treated differently and how he understood that he would be treated differently simply by virtue of his not being born in the USA, an African American, though his roots are enslavement like everybody else who's Black in the Western Hemisphere, by and large. So, Wilfred, what do you think when you hear this conversation, and how does well, we might have lost him. He'll come back. But Thomas, you jump in. You build on that.
Well, I think that because we got a big West African population here, Liberians, Nigerians, and I will tell you that they're in the system as well, and they're facing the same thing that we're facing. Just like your father having.
Yeah.
Okay, he's back.
Brother Barry,
come on back and put your camera down. Camera.
I keep sitting here and looking at your name, Barry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, a lot of my relatives were called Barry.
Mm-hmm.
Bossy Barry, James Barry, this Barry. I'm from Liberia.
Right up.
Bring your camera down, Wilfred.
I'm from Liberia.
There we go. Go ahead.
In 1820s, it was decided that somebody went and read the Bible and said, it is stated that a slave will one day rule the master. So there was a Speaker of the House from Kentucky called Henry Clay, the brother of the man called Cassius Clay. He was a very powerful man. He went to James Monroe and he said, you got to get a slave out of here. Where do we find this place? And he taught about just getting them and letting them go. So a man called Thomas Jefferson was the first secretary, second vice president, third president. He decided to put a package together with Clay and form the American Colonization Society. Because Britain had a colony, France had a colony, they needed a colony. But there was a man called Frederick Douglass. We have to stand up. Frederick Douglass stood up and he told Abraham Lincoln, he said, Abby, he said, colonization and slavery that is set a twin from two mothers. Or my dead body would Liberia be a colony. The Colonization Society is still collecting money, but Liberia was never colonized. And if African Americans don't believe this, they need to hook up with Africa, especially Liberia. Let us stand up for each other. Now we are talking about wars in the Middle East and whereas in Europe. Do you know how many wars are in Africa today? You hardly hear it. Because why? Because we are not there holding on to each other. The program you're talking about, I never heard about it. If I heard about it, my brother, I will tell you. I'll be your foot soldier. So as we leave from here, let's exchange information. Okay. And we will work together. You see, there are two things you're talking about foster care. There are two things that determine the makeup of an entity. Let's just say a man, the genotype and the phenotype. What is the genotype? The genetic makeup. I looks like that because his grandfather looked like that. His father looked like that. I look like this for the same reason. But if you look at Al, I have these things in his ears. His grandfather never had it in his ear. His father never had it. That's the phenotype, the environment. So when you take a little black boy, a little black girl, and send that child to live with a Caucasian or somebody who's different. The environment will groom that person into the person that is different from the mothers, fathers, the brothers and sisters, and the rest of the family. So that's how they break our back. You know, and the thing is, Bob Marley said, he said, every time you plant a seed, they say kill it before it grows. You are nothing when your seed cannot grow. So we in the Liberian communities, in the Liberian community, we are very resilient people. It so happened that over the years, this is the leader. Yes, I was on KMOJ. I was at Lucille Kitchen all the time. Paul Wellstone was like a brother to me. Paul David Wellstone. But now we are gone down, but we shall rise. You know why? A powerful woman in Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center called me and said, I want for you to run for city office. And I considered it, I was happy. My wife said, no, you're not. Start your own company. I started a company. I called. There's a pastor in this town. You guys need to know him. Yes, Pastor Tabla. In fact, right now, I think he's raising, I think, $240 million to start another phase of his church, even in Africa, all around the world, literally. We have to come together. Now I started Safeguard Minnesota. Save, S-A-F-E, guard, Minnesota. How did I get that name? I called Tabla. I said, Pastor Tabla, they want for me to go into politics. But my wife said if I dare, she would put water in my nose while I'm sleeping at night. You know, she do joke a lot. And I started it. He said, but do me a favor. I said, what? He said, I want for you to do two things for me. I said, what? He said, let me name the organization and let me be on your board. 2-3 days later, he called and he said, whatever name you gave the organization, let the word Safeguard be in it. My wife and myself formulated until we came up with Safeguard. That night, they came on the 5 o'clock news that the governor had appointed somebody, commissioner of safety. That's one prong of our business. A day later, the governor appointed somebody in charge of equity. So that's what we do, safety and equity. You talk about taking our children and giving them to people who are completely different from them genetically. They're not being in a safe environment. We promote safety, equity, and then we are against violence and inequity. Now you talk about reparation. If you give reparation to Europe, I think it was in 1947, when Marshall, Secretary of State Marshall, went to Harvard to speak. And he came up with the idea of bailing Europe out. They bailed Europe out. And yet today, if America were to pay for what the black man did in this country, America will go broke. Simple as that.
Bring your camera down again. Bring the camera down.
There is no country that came from the loins of America more than Liberia. That way you get a chance, pick up the book, 10 African-American president founding fathers of Liberia, by my friend and myself, David Smith, Dr. David Smith. And then we have African wisdom, 365 days a year. Read that book and think about the wisdom of Africa. I tell you this today, we need to come together. We need to build.
There we go.
We need to build the alliance. When Al tells me something, I don't ever think about saying no. And you are on board now. If you tell me something, I would never think about saying no, because there is strength in unity. I was shocked when I heard that Jimmy Cliff was in Minnesota. I just moved to Minnesota from North Dakota. That's where I started my academic journey. And I asked one of my friends to take me there. All of a sudden, Jimmy came outside to ease himself. I don't know if they didn't have a restroom in the place. But I walked in and I said, Jimmy, thank you so much for what you have done for me. Because the harder they come, the harder they fall. Forces are just trying to keep me down, but they can't keep me on the ground. You look at me, say, can I get a hug? He hugged me. He said, you have an accent, where are you from? I said, I'm from Liberia. He said, that's the land created by Jehovah Jireh to be the home of the black man, no matter where he came from. But here we are today. Sometimes I sit among my friends, I hear them talking about African American, or those people. I go to African American, oh, you have an accent. I said, go beyond the accent and listen to the eloquence that's behind it.
Let me
We
bring
cannot
Thomas
keep
Berry
pushing.
back in, Brother Wilford. Thomas, we got a couple of minutes left, but this
Yes.
is a great conversation, a
Yeah,
great
so we
sharing.
cannot
And it's
depart from
a
it. We
beginning.
have to hold on to each other. So let's hold on, my brethren.
Right on. Well, I want to say thank you, Mr. McFarlane. I do want to invite people out because we are having an event.
Go ahead.
There. We're doing an event on October 18th at the Urban League from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. That is 2100 Plymouth Avenue North, Minneapolis.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's going to be a discussion about the African American Family Preservation Act. Rena Moran is going to be on the panel. Angela Connolly, Esther Abaje, and Sister Khalees Houston will moderate. And they'll be feeding folks. It's free, but we'll be explaining this bill, and we'll be talking about why people need to organize and still vote. What do we need to get out of this vote? And can we take the African American Family Preservation Act and turn it into a national bill?
Yes.
Walt signed it into law, and he'll be a vice presidential. Hopeful. We believe that he'll win. So if they get in, we're hoping that they turn this into a national law.
Let me ask you in the last few minutes here what your expectations and hopes are for the election coming up next month.
My expectations are simple. I'm expecting the American people to do the right thing. Donald Trump is the TV show. He's not a real politician, and we saw that in the debate with Kamala. You see what's the difference when a politician goes up against an acting politician. He couldn't talk about policy. He couldn't even talk about the policy that he did well. And I'm hoping that America chooses the right thing. The tricky thing about this country is because of Barack Obama and moving forward those 10 paces, America's a very stubborn girl. Every time we go 10 steps forward on race, we go 5 steps backwards and we find a Donald Trump. So now we need to move 10 more paces forward, and then we need to get the Donald Trumps of the world out of our system.
What is the date for the event at the Urban League? Date and time again?
It's October 18th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.
That's Friday, October 18th. Hopefully, I'd love to have maybe several people from that event on the program next week. Maybe you can arrange for somebody to be with me on Tuesday for a few minutes, somebody on Wednesday of next week, somebody on Thursday, so that we keep this idea in front of our people, because it's an important conversation, an important event. And then, anytime that our people are convening, we need to elevate that. That's what our goal is. That's our mission as Insight News and McFarlane Media. Brother Wilford, thank you for your comments. I want to just reemphasize that we're simply beginning a process basis, sharing, commenting, giving feedback. Thomas Berry, you'll be with me regularly as well. People love your voice, love your analysis. We get a lot of good feedback whenever you're here, Thomas Berry. So make sure that you share this out to your networks and across your platforms. We want to generate that connectivity in our people. Well, with that, I want to thank both of you, Wilford Harris. Thank you, Thomas Berry. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll see you again tomorrow. Take care.
Thank you so much, Al. May God richly bless you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, sir.